Hi, everybody. This is Zariya here. I'm so thrilled to be coming to you from Sussex in England. I run Restoring Love, and I am delighted to be here with Joel and Treya. Hopefully, Lars coming, but he's having computer issues. And we're going to be talking about understanding neurodiversity and the gifts and challenges of neurodiversity. So it has been a learning journey for me because I only got diagnosed with autism and ADHD this year. So it's been an incredible journey of learning about myself and realizing, oh, so that's why I'm weird. And it would be great to share with other people who feel weird in the world, or you have people who are different that you want to understand. So maybe you can both introduce yourselves and share a little bit about you.
I guess I'll go. My name is Joel Richards. I was diagnosed with ADHD back in 2015. And it's been a journey. I would say at first the diagnosis was very helpful, but I sort of resisted, got sort of stuck in an ableist mind trap. And I'm friends with Zariya, and our conversations about neurodiversity and sort of struggles with that, both living with your own sort of quirks and features, and then also interacting with other people who may or may not be neurodiverse, and the challenges there. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks. And Trey.
I'm Treya Lufu. I'm Zariya's daughter, and I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 16 years old. And I remember when I got diagnosed, the lady who diagnosed me told my mom, "Oh, her dyslexia is so severe. She should not be able to read because of how severe it is." But I think because I wasn't diagnosed when I was younger, it was like, well, you can do it. And like my mom was very encouraging and would sit with me through all my work. And she would always say, oh, when I got to this age, like I really struggled when I was younger, but when I got to this age, it just clicked. It never clicked for me, but I think that always helped to keep me going. And also, I'm pretty sure I have autism, and I am in the process of getting diagnosed. I'm like creating a document of all the lists of stuff that I struggle with that are come across as autistic traits.
Yeah, I think, you know, what you said, Joel, of that internalized ableism, I think I have lived with that so much. And I have also shamed other people for being neurodiverse because I didn't know what it was.
Right.
And their traits just reminded me of the trauma that I'd gone through. And so I reacted to them instead of going, oh, they are just neurodivergent.
Yeah.
And I got stuck so much in over-functioning for everybody else to hide the challenges that I had in being neurodiverse, and masking a lot, and then melting down and completely burning out. And I wish that we learned these things. I've got a degree in psychology, never taught about it. And it's so fundamental to who I am and how my brain works. And it's so frustrating that we aren't taught about it, so we can just learn the differences and the gifts, because there's so many gifts to being neurodivergent.
Right. Right. And, you know, when I was first diagnosed as an adult, I was in my 30s. You know, I had so many misconceptions that I think I just didn't understand what it was that I was really, what it was that I had really been given. You know, an opportunity to sort of reevaluate myself and my life and my strengths and where I was struggling. You know, I simply saw ADHD as a, and I wonder if, as we continue to research the topic, that name doesn't shift somewhere along the line. Because while I think attention deficit is the sort of the key characteristic or trait, it doesn't seem like that's always, in my lived experience, the defining element of it.
So what is the defining element for you, do you think?
Well, I don't know that I settled on one defining element, but one thing that you mentioned a lot was masking, and that wasn't really talked about by the healthcare team that diagnosed me. I'm in America. Our healthcare system is not great, and part of what inhibited my journey early on is I was diagnosed by a team who did a very thorough evaluation, but then because a member of their team wasn't covered under my insurance, and we were going through graduate school at the time, I didn't have the financial resource to continue treatment. And I was also struggling with this, like I said, this internal ableism of, is this diagnosis real? And do I really have these issues, or am I just lazy? Is the real solution here that I just need to work harder? If I just do more? And there wasn't, and if it was taught, conveyed to me, I obviously wasn't receptive, but I don't remember any moment where someone said, let's step back a minute and look at what you're doing and see how that contributes to something called masking, where instead of really addressing the problem and saying, this is how your mind works, this is how attention works for you, and these are the tools that might be successful, I was just trying to do more of the same and create sort of live up to an image of myself that I was trying to project, not just externally, but also internally. And just leads to more burnout. So
I so agree with you. And I think that when we're doing that, we lose track of our gifts because we are just trying to be somebody else.
Yes.
And, we were talking the other day, you and I, Joel, about how life is not set up for folk who are neurodiverse. Life is set up to wake at 8 every morning and work until 5. But our bodies don't function that way. Lau, for instance, I wish he was here. His computer's not working. He sometimes is up, like he said, Treya texted 1 o'clock saying, I'm still not asleep. I can't sleep. He would be
he messaged me at 1 a.m. saying, I can't sleep, so I will just catch the bus to school. You can leave.
Yeah, and it's just so frustrating for him that he can't sleep. And it's not his fault. It's not something, it is a very strong trait in folk who are neurodivergent. And we were saying last week that if we could set up our lives to actually honor who we are, rather than try to fit the mold of what is expected of us in society, we would thrive so much more, like going through the cycles of hyperfocus, where you might work, I don't know, what time were you awake the other day? 4 o'clock in the morning, where you'd hyper-focused all through the night.
Something like that.
But then you have to be up the next day, like a functioning human. And that sort of, a cycle of hyper-focus and shut down, where you can't function the next day. And then you're like, come on, I just have to keep going. And it isn't really fair on you. To give yourself that, chastisement that you're not just operating on a high level all the time, because when you have focus, you work intensely.
Right. With that, if it's okay, I'd like to go back to something that Treya talked about, or put or react to maybe something that Treya talked about is maybe more fair. You mentioned, Treya, that you weren't diagnosed with dyslexia until you were 16, right? Which is pretty late in the game in your education to sort of receive such a diagnosis with, having such a real challenge there. And I love that you said that because you didn't know any better and your mother didn't know any better, it wasn't that, well, I have to be careful here, because it wasn't that you didn't know any better. You were then able to succeed. Your mother and your own efforts had a big part of that. But I think it also begs the question of, or to me, it speaks to the idea that accommodations are not excuses. That learning how you work, how your brain functions, and what techniques or approaches to life and work will work well with how your brain processes and pays attention is about having in many ways the same kind of success, but not trying to go about it in a neurotypical way. Does that make sense? Obviously, there are some aspects of neurodiversity that you just struggle. I mean, dyslexia is so hard, right? Because there are ways to sort of counter it, and you could speak to that far better than I can. That's not a personal challenge of mine. So I don't want to diminish that. I think sometimes we talk about neurodiversity, the narrative can turn into, it's a superpower. And for those of us who've legitimately felt beaten down and struggled with these things, that can feel like almost a whitewashing of our difficulties.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go there, but I do think that it's important to sort of, for me at least, to put out there that accommodations and adjustments aren't excuses, that we're all trying to achieve the same kind of success. I mean, you're on the, I know that you're, I hope I'm not outing you here, Trey, but I know that you're on the cusp of, finishing your studies, right? Which is a huge accomplishment for anybody, but certainly for someone who's struggled with dyslexia for so many years. And it's not that your degree means any less. It's not that you've done any less work, right? You've just had to do it a different way. And anyway, I feel like that's important to kind of inject into the narrative that, for those people who are struggling with their own neurodiversity, and then also those who are struggling with loving or caring for someone with neurodiversity, that you don't have to necessarily expect less, you have to expect different.
Yes. And Joel, what you say about accommodations, I think is huge, because a lot of people are incredibly creative, talented, dynamic, who are neurodiverse, but there are areas that they cannot function. Like, people have come into my house and gone, like, shocked by the mess that I just step over, because with ADHD, unless it's intense, urgent, deep, interesting, I have zero capacity for it.
Right.
But if it is interesting, deep, I can literally work through the night. And I will wake up, at the moment I'm waking up at like 3 a.m. most days, because I'm excited by what I'm doing, and I'm living on 4 or 5 hours sleep a night. But it's because I'm excited. And that's the friend messaged saying, I don't know if it's excitement, I think it's menopause. I was like, oh, okay. That could be it. But having those accommodations, I think, actually enables us to function in the world that is very neurotypical.
Right.
And without that, people will judge us that, but why can you hyperfocus, be so talented, create such dynamic stuff, but then you can't do your laundry? You're getting in debt because you're not paying your bills. There's such a contradiction, and it's because of how our brains are wired. One
Right.
thing that really helped me is reading that the dendrites are in an autistic brain go a lot deeper and have less dendrites coming off. So a neural pathway goes deeper and has less dendrites. But then there's also things that synapses, there are a lot more synapses in folk who are neurodiverse, neurodivergent. And so that's why you're so much more aware, because there's so much more connectivity. And so our brain just doesn't function in like the typical way of, a friend of mine, bless her, always goes, if only you just tidy 20 minutes a day, it would all be fine. I'm like, that's all right for you to say. My brain doesn't work in 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
Someone's asked me what font size and stuff. So I use Veranda, because it's quite clear, and I normally prefer 14 to 16, but I will use 12 if I have to, because 12 is my favorite number. And then the thing is, I do love reading, but I think it's because I come from a family of readers, but it's so hard for me to read. Like, I have a book that I'm reading now, and I started it months ago, and I think I'm only on chapter 3 just because it takes me so much energy and so much time to read. And I do also have an overlay, but that it's just so much faffle for me, and it's really tiring to use. So I prefer pages that are a bit more yellowy and not like white because it's so bright to read. And then someone else has also said something about how folk believe that accommodations are a form of cheating, and it's so annoying when people like think that. Like, I recently had an exam at uni, and there weren't I got extra time. I have a reader and a scribe in my exam, so I have a lot of support already, but I don't have a short-term memory, and we had to do referencing. We had to do citations and we had to write 3 short essays. So I thought, for other people who have summary of adjustments to be able to bring in a reference list. And one time in like a lecture afterwards, I heard some people complaining of like, oh, it's so unfair, some people got to bring in a reference list and stuff. And it's like, it's just so that I'm at the same level as you guys. Like, it's and that was really frustrating.
Really frustrating. I wish people could see how hard you have to work to get onto the same level. So what might take somebody else 2 hours will take you 10 or 20 hours to do the same thing. And, you know, literally growing up, every Saturday and Sunday, I did 10 hours of work going through everything Treya had learned throughout the week. Because being autistic and ADHD, I get hyperfocuses, and my children are my hyperfocus, which makes it really easy because then I am obsessed of being the best parent that I can be to them. But it meant that, you know, she was in tears most days because I would make her do the A-class work instead of just doing the sort of special needs work. And she would go, but the teacher told me I don't need to. And I said, well, I'm not the teacher, I'm your mother. And if you want a life that you want to thrive in, you have to work harder. And so being neurodiverse is not easy, and it does take a lot of hard work to actually function in a world that isn't built for people who are different. I didn't realize that there were comments. First, I just want to say hello to everybody and huge welcome. Please ask comments and share where you are. So lovely to have you, and ask anything. We're so happy to answer. So Nathan said, we're really hard on ourselves and each other. And I love that neurotypical people who often don't understand neurodivergence very well are at least generally less judgmental. That's fascinating, Nathan, because I have not found that at all. But I'm really glad that you found that, because I've often found that folk who are neurotypical are really judgment of my mess, of the fact that I'm not interested in looking good, of the fact that I'm really direct. People will say that I am rude because I just share what I feel. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm never trying to be mean. I'm just trying to share what I feel. So I'm glad that you've had that experience. I certainly have it. Have you, Joel? I've never found, Joel, in the 1.5 years of working with you ever being rude, but maybe you found me being rude.
No, I've never found you to be rude, but I live in New York City. Like, directness is a way of life here, you know? I appreciate people who are direct and say what they mean and share how they feel. So I may not be the best judge. There are different standards of, that's the other tricky thing here, is they're just different societal norms and different sort of societies and cultures and places we find ourselves in, right? Do unto others, I guess, is sort of the best motto. It does bring up an interesting idea, though, that sometimes, in my experience, in neurodiversity, but also just in general in life, sometimes the people who are educated or maybe informed but inexperienced are the most sort of sympathetic, because they know of a problem, but they don't have any personal experience with the problem. So they're usually willing to go above and beyond to accommodate, right? Those are the people, the instances where I almost worry about, I don't want to say too many accommodations, but it's almost one of those things where you're just like, I can do this. You know what I mean? Like I am capable. Or it's like, like your teacher, Trey, saying like, you don't have to do this work. And clearly with enough support, you were capable of it, right? There's a danger in going too far and expecting too little. Again, every situation is different. I don't want to say that, someone who really struggles can anyway, but every situation is different. But I think it is possible to go too far. The flip side is sometimes I've experienced this to some degree in neurodiversity. I've caught myself doing it actually. Is if you struggle with something and you've found a way to overcome it, sometimes it's harder to develop empathy or certainly sympathy for someone who may be in a similar situation. It's sort of, I did this, why can't you do it? And sometimes that can be a very powerful and inspiring attitude, but sometimes that can be very judgmental and destructive, right? Because we don't know the entirety of someone else's situation. We don't know everything that they're struggling with. We are in their shoes, but part of the problem is having enough lived experience. It's easy. Like I said, I'll be honest. I find myself doing it, because I have some experience with what they're going through. I assume I have all of the experience. And if I was able to overcome it, they should be able to overcome it.
And that's so hard because we are all so different. We have complete, even though we might, I am autistic and ADHD and have PDA. Treya has dyslexia and autism. Lau is similar. You have ADHD. We all have completely different neurodiverse traits, but some of them match, and we can go, "Oh, you're doing that thing I do." At times, it's really. When you've met one person, we all have such a different relationship to how our neurodiversity forms in us, or neurodivergency forms in us. And Treya has a thing that she loves in that. Do you want to share about that?
What do you mean? It's
not on a scale.
Or are you talking about autism? So, because of course, they're which we're trying to get out of oh, this person's higher functioning, this person's lower functioning, but there's actually now a circle.
Oh dear, Trey's got stuck. Am I stuck as well? Oh, Joel, you're mute.
Of different struggles. Is it okay?
Yeah,
no?
Carry on.
Is it working?
Yeah, you got stuff.
Okay, and it's split into little segments all throughout the circle, and the more colours filled in each box mean the more that the person struggles with certain things. And certain sections might not be coloured in at all. Some might be half full, some may be one. So it's just saying every autistic person struggles with different things and needs support in different things, but they also are they thrive in different areas and don't need as much support in that area. And it's ableist to think, oh, if someone is struggling more, that means you need to support them more, and then give them more freedom to do the stuff that they are able to do. And then with the people who you perceive to be as being able to function better and be like, oh, they don't need any support, but no, they do need support in areas that they do need support. Is that what? Yeah,
it's really helpful.
I did an essay on it.
Somebody asked, why did Treya not get diagnosed until 16? I knew from when she was tiny, because she couldn't speak until she was 7. And so I tried very hard. But Treya is like, she's one of the sweetest human beings on earth. She doesn't put her hand up, so she was completely invisible. And I was a very pushy mom, but they just kept saying, well, she's bottom of the class, but even if she was sick, I would still send her to school. So her attendance was fine. Her behavior was fine. Because she didn't behave badly, she didn't get diagnosis. So we finally had to go private. And they were like, I don't actually know how she functions because her dyslexia is so severe. But because she had similar things to me, like she was saying, Mom, the words fly off the page. And I was like, they do for me too. Isn't that funny? So I think that was the issue for me, is growing up with my kids who are neurodivergent, and we were all similar. I didn't know that I was neurodivergent. Yeah. I just thought I had complex PTSD. And then after I'd done therapy on that, I still had all these different things. And it was only through my son getting a diagnosis that everybody in the training, we went on a parenting course for folk with autism, that everybody was just assumed I was autistic because I could understand everything that they were talking about from my lived experience. So it's only through him getting the diagnosis that I got that diagnosis. I know that I've got like a whole list of things that I wanted us to address, but I also want to answer the questions. So I'm kind of torn between them. And Joel, maybe while I'm looking through the questions, you can share a bit on like the strengths of neurodivergency that you find that make you different and special.
Talking about my strengths. That's what I love to do. Thank you, Zariya.
Tell that I asked you directly. Because I love you. And
put on the spot. Well, kind of in keeping with the conversation, I struggle with that question a little bit because everyone is so different. And I am so different. And I want to recognize that a lot of these things, ADHD, I can speak to from some personal experience. Autism runs in my family. So I have people that I love. Well, some people that I love on this call, but I have a family that I've watched grow up that have struggled on autism. And I don't want to diminish the fact that there are struggles to varying degrees. And part of that comes from living in a neurotypical world. And part of that may just come from how those particular brains function. But as someone with ADHD, as I kind of come to understand what that means and accept the fact that my brain works in a certain way, there is, for me, I remember, probably shouldn't confess this on a public call, but I guess I already have my diploma, so I'm safe. When I was an undergrad, I got dual degrees in theater, acting, and in English. And the English degree was mostly accidental because in theater, you just have to take direction. And in English classes, you can talk back to the teachers. Wow. And I may have PDA because I really enjoyed talking back to teachers. But I
sometimes do wonder if you have PDA.
Right. But I wasn't rude, but I just really loved having opinions and arguing with people. But I was doing 2 degrees. I was in productions and working. I was not sleeping much. And in English degree, you're assigned massive amounts of reading. And I would always set out to do that reading, and I would never actually get it done. But I realized that if I went to class and I waited the first 20 minutes of class, the people, bless them, who had done the reading but had no idea what they'd read, would ask a bunch of questions. And then after the first 20 minutes of class, I would figure out not only what the reading was about, where the discussion was going, but I would then start making the insightful comments, and I would get all the participation points. And to the point where I could actually write essays about books I had not read and would score, I suspect, higher than a number of my classmates, because my brain is really good at putting pieces together, putting divergent ideas together. Now, that same afternoon, I might go to the theater department and I would be cast in a play and I'd have to memorize lines. And that kind of mental labor is all about a sequential type of thinking. This word has to go after this word, after this word, after this word. And I could not do that. Could not do that.
Yes.
When I was doing theater professionally, I was ashamed and would hide from my coworkers the number of hours I would spend trying to memorize. And I could talk about that for hours. But so it's like one type of thinking I was very blessed at, performed at a kind of obnoxiously high level, inappropriately, really, I just wasn't doing the work. Could get away with a lot. But then the sort of the foundational aspect of theater, just memorizing lines, took, I remember one production in particular, I tallied it up. It was in the hundreds of hours I spent.
And that, what you're saying there, Joel, is fascinating, because you could work a job, 2 degrees, plus work in the theater department, that intense capacity. And then on the other side of it, like Lau has this completely, that he will go to school or he'll work through the night, and then he's completely shut down, nonverbal, in a dark room, not able to engage. And it's so hard for people who are neurodivergent to have that because of the sensory overwhelm. If they're like different, I find for myself, if I'm at a party, the music's too loud, there are lots of people talking. It takes so much to hone into what one person is saying that when I come home, I'm just flatlined, because I've had to overwork so hard to actually be present. It's much easier that my kids are older because they make less noise, and they listen more as adults than they did. But I really struggled parenting because of the noise. That was really hard for me. And I think that's where people just get so confused, that we have this intense capacity to be able, if it's a hyperfocus for us, but then just complete incapacity on the other side.
Well, I almost got kicked out of the acting program at my university. I was on probation because one of my professors ultimately it came down to memorization. She felt like I wasn't, and she saw me doing all of these things, and she said, "You're not serious about this. You have to drop all these things."
Wow.
It was a very difficult moment on many levels, but I didn't understand myself well enough at the time to know that what was happening is I could do 100 things well, because again, it's that brain that can jump from one thing to another, can put ideas together. It was interesting, and there was always some novelty, so I could jump from one thing to another. But having to sit down and focus on one activity, in particular, one activity that required me to think in a way that I couldn't do very well, was excruciating. And it left me more exhausted and more burned out. And I was finding so at the time I was just sort of following. There wasn't a deliberateness about it. And so I really took that judgment and had no way of sort of countering what she was saying. And I really took it to heart. It really,
that's so hard.
It was a negatively defining moment in my life, because I felt like what was my strength was seen as a weakness, instead of saying, "Hey, look." And again, I'm sure it was well-meaning and uninformed, but I think it would be better to say, "Hey, look, you're struggling with this. You're doing all these other things. Hey, how can we approach this problem that you have in a way that supports you?" Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Instead of looking at the issue. And again, I can understand where she was coming from a neurotypical standpoint. Yeah, I was clearly had a lot of energy.
Yes.
Why couldn't I just drop some of these things and focus on that? Later on in life, I tried doing that. I tried dropping things and focusing on particular things, and I was miserable.
Yes. You literally die inside.
Right.
It's just like you feel so empty.
Right.
Ultimately, in the UK, which I'm very sad, Joel, and I apologize on behalf of the American government, but I've just found out about access to work, where they will supply somebody who does your admin for a few hours a week, because you shit at it.
Right.
No, so it really helps. But I just want to share a quick anecdote. I have that same thing of memorizing lines, but mine was humiliating, Joel. I was on stage doing a performance and I forgot my lines and ended up, I felt so humiliated that I sat on the floor and cried instead of speaking my lines. So we both have defining moments of the same thing. And I just want to add that that conversation is an example of parallel play between neurodivergent people where your empathy is about another story that you've gone through that validates what the other person has done. Where in neurotypical world, that's called centering yourself and not listening.
Yes.
And it's such a different thing because Joel and I will spend sometimes way too long going, oh, there's a conversation. Oh, here's another story. Oh, here's another story. And we can just, we will get lost doing that because we've got time blindness where we don't necessarily notice how long something will take or how long something has taken. And then we like, oh, well, that was our hour that we were meant to work. And I know that, you know, I have a list of 2 pages of what I wanted to talk about. We've got 1 hour because Joel has to go and get his daughter. There's no way, but I over-exaggerate in my head what we are capable of. We won't get through it all, but I hope that those who are listening will be a little bit more unshamed by what we're sharing, that because we all relate to each other with a sense of love, acceptance, and care, we're trying to understand, oh, that's this neurodivergent trait, instead of you should be more typical.
Right.
And it is just so life-affirming to be around people who are not making you wrong, but are validating who you are.
Yeah, and also completely different topic. Someone has asked what PDA is, and I think you have a great, like, you of course have the actual definition, but you have a better like alternative of what it should be called as well, Mom.
So PDA is pathological demand avoidance, and like Joel said about ADHD is just such a terrible name for it because it doesn't capture the awesomeness of ADHD with the hyperfocus, creativity, pattern recognition, attention to details that are just miraculous. To call it attention deficit disorder just crushes the heart of what it is. But PDA, saying pathological demand avoidance, is basically people who kind of are oppositionally defiant, hate authority, don't want anybody telling them what to do at all. The alternative, the neurodivergent affirming language of PDA is pervasive desire for autonomy, which is basically like, I am my own person. I want to do it my way. I am creative. I am dynamic. And I want to find my own way in this. My mother used to just do her head in because she would say, can you do this? And I would be, or she would say, go and do this now. No. Or don't do that. No, I'm going to do this because I want to learn from making the mistake. I want to find my own way in this. And PDA is a profile of autism. When I got diagnosed, I said to the psychiatrist, if in the UK they diagnosed PDA, he was like, yes, you would be diagnosed with PDA. And folk who are PDA are not typical autistic people because there is a huge social component that you enjoy people, but you enjoy role plays where typical autistic people don't always like role plays. So, for example, my kids, some days would be pats all day, and they would come in and say, we're ready for food. And I would put their food on the floor and they would eat it from the bowls. And there was a lot more creativity and allowance for me because I knew I hated being controlled. So I was going to be a creative mom. So instead of saying to Lau, you go and brush your teeth, I would say, I hear your teeth are calling. I hear you. And we would sing different songs to get him engaged in what needed to happen without demanding, controlling, or telling him how to be. And it comes across for many people as like a resistance to authority, but it's more that everybody's equal. You're no better than me. We're all just equal on this path, and don't tell me what to do. Don't advise me. You don't know me. You don't know my skill set. You don't know my support structure. Trust that I know myself, and I will ask folk who are experts in that area that I might be struggling in, because they have the wisdom of what they've done to overcome it. But I'm not going to ask every, person in the street, hey, can you advise me? Because they might tell me something that is like a neurotypical approach that makes no sense to me, and no, I don't have the capacity for it. So, and also part of PDA is we fixate on specific people. So I know that is true for me, that suddenly I will just become, I want to know everything about somebody, and I just relish, and it is just like nectar, listening to them, engaging with them, and it is delicious. It's like I meet different creative people all my life, and I just love hearing from them, engaging with them, and we learn through stories versus being told how to be or what to do. So PDA is a very different profile that other people look at as you're really oppositional or really confrontational, but it's more just we like autonomy and we like fairness. So if there's an injustice in the world, we want to find a way to be able to put it right. It doesn't matter if everybody hates us. What matters is to be able to make a difference in that area, because it matters so much to us. So that's PDA. I hope I answered that.
I thought that was a great answer.
Thanks. All right. Anything else burning that you want to speak about?
Spoon theory.
Okay. I would like to talk about spoon theory.
Spoon theory.
Yeah. So spoon theory was created by Christine. I can't pronounce the surname. But it was to describe her experience with living with chronic illness. But a lot of neurodivergent people have also taken it on, as well as people with chronic illnesses, because they interlink and like it's a similar thing. A few years ago I did a Instagram post on it. The spoons represent the amount of energy someone has for that day, and for a neurotypical person, normally their spoons are like proper spoons without any holes in or like any like rust or anything like that, but for like I saw a TikTok a while ago explaining that neurotypical able-bodied people, like on a good day, might have 30 spoons to be able to do all of their activities. But someone who has a chronic illness or are differently abled and or have a neurodiversity, on a good day, we might only have 12 spoons. And that's our good day. And then for a neurotypical able-bodied person, on their bad day, they might have 12 spoons. So I guess like a neurotypical person's bad day is a neurodivergent or chronically ill person's good day, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that was quite a shock of like, oh, and most of the time I'm running on minus spoons. So and there are lots of different like drawings of like how people see their spoons. So some might have holes in, some might just be like flat, so nothing is like being able to hold inside and stuff. But I think it's like a really good theory to be able to like have like a visual representation of like how much energy you may have in a day, and to be able to be like, oh, today it takes 5 spoons to get out of bed and brush my teeth, but then on another day it might only take 1 spoon to get out of bed and brush your teeth. And like every day is so different, and sometimes you have to prioritize using different spoons for different activities.
That makes so much sense. And I think that it really helps to like bring more empathy to your experience rather than judging yourself on, I know, Trey, you do that, of, feeling frustrated with yourself that don't have as much capacity as other people. But, I so understand it, where words are swimming off the page. You don't have a short-term memory to remember what you've just read. It takes so much more effort to do anything. But when it comes to empathy, I don't know anybody who has the capacity of empathy that you do. You are just so attuned. Like Trey has just done an assignment on making up clients and then sharing what she would do in every session. And she got like one of the highest in the class because it's all just about empathy, and she could visualize the client. And we were both just sitting there in tears reading about this imaginary client that doesn't exist, because it was so touching, her empathy and love and care. And I think that that's one of the fake or lies that folk who are autistic are not empathetic. Because actually I feel everything that everybody is going through, and I often feel it before they feel it. And often they resist everything because they just want to be happy, smiley, nice. And I'm like, I can feel this. No, I'm fine, but I can feel this. And often people will lie. One guy said to me, I said, it looks like you have got a bit of depression going on or something. He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, okay, I must be wrong. I could just see it. And then he whispered, okay, I am, but I hope that if I smiled enough, people wouldn't notice. And I'm like, well, maybe it's just because I'm attuned and a therapist, I could really see it. And I said, what color does it feel like? And he said, it's blue. And I said, it doesn't feel blue. And he said, well, it's actually orange, but I didn't think that was spiritual. And I just thought it was hilarious. This wanting to look good in the world rather than being real. And one of my biggest struggles is that when people are being happy and nice, because I feel everything that they are going through, I feel the undercurrents that they're not speaking about. And then I will address them because I can feel them. And that's why I so appreciate hanging around with Joel, because even though I've never met this man in my life before, but on Zoom is where we hang out.
Just say, who knows if I'm even real? I could just be Chat GPT.
Yeah, with a program with a voice that I like listening to.
That's right.
But one of the reasons that I like talking to you is because you won't bullshit me with, if you're in a bad mood, you're in a bad mood, and we can discuss what the bad mood is about. And we can talk about it. And so I don't have to overfunction for our friendship to be peaceful. And you're not going to take out, if I express something, you're not going to make me wrong for expressing it, because you do the same. And so it's called the double empathy problem, where neurotypical people can generally empathize with each other because they're doing the same thing. Hello, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? Yes, I'm great. Whereas I'm just like, you don't feel fine. And then they're like, why are you so rude? Why do you make us feel uncomfortable? No, you just don't feel fine. And so, but other neurodivergent people really get it, and it's really easy to communicate with them. So I tend to find that my closest friends are neurodivergent because we can just be real with each other.
Right.
And then we can talk about depth and whatever our interests are, and we both have a spaciousness for that.
And also there's been a lot more research coming out saying that it's not that autistic folk are not empathetic, it's that they feel like the energies and stuff in their whole body and they might not actually know what they're feeling, and they might not be able to distinguish whether it's other people's feelings or it's their own feelings. So that's like quite often why in like social situations we do get so burnt out and overstimulated, because we're feeling everyone's energies and it's so hard to distinguish. So it's not that we're not empathetic, it's that we're overly empathetic, and it's actually really hard to like manage that, because we're not really taught in schools and stuff how to actually self-regulate to be able to, yeah,
that's so true. I think that's such a great point. And I'm going to do next week, I'm going to do a training on self-regulation skills. So if you are somebody who is a neurodivergent and you struggle with that, I'm going to go and find the link to it, and I'll put it in the comments, so that anybody who is keen to learn self-regulation skills, because if you can learn the self-regulation skills, like often before I do something, I will check in, what am I feeling? So that when I get there, right, I can distinguish, oh, that's other people's feelings, because I know how I was feeling when I came in. But it is exhausting picking up everybody else's emotions and undercurrents that they are not managing themselves. So it means I often have to overfunction to calm other people, because they don't know. We're not taught it. It's not like, the majority of people aren't taught how to regulate in the world. So yes. So somebody said, is that an autistic trait? I struggle to know what my feelings are. It's called alexithymia, which is just an inability to name and recognize that you are feeling something and not able to name it, because you don't necessarily even know that you're experiencing it. So it's called alexithymia, and about 50% of autistic people have it. And in terms of other stats that are quite interesting, about 1% in the UK are diagnosed autistic, but 2.5% in the US. I think they are more ahead in terms of diagnosis, and also separating out different types of diagnosis in autistics. Sadly, only 15% of people who are autistic are employed full-time. And around have ADHD, though 32% of folk who are ADHD are self-employed in comparison to the rest of the population. And on average, they work about 1 month less a year due to sickness and burnout. So it's, if there were more accommodations at work, we would be able to function better and be able to work harder. But because there isn't, and it's too overwhelming or too stimulating or not stimulating enough, it's really hard. When I had my diagnosis, the psychiatrist said, you should never get a job. You should only ever work at home, because otherwise you will burn out and not be able to function at all, and you'll go on disability. So how you're living your life now is what you need to do, because you need to have time alone to renew, away from sensory distraction. Because if somebody walks in the room or talks, I will move. Like when Joel and I co-work, sometimes if I'm finding myself really distracted, I hide him, because if he turns his head, I'm like, is he okay? Is everything going on? Because I just get so distracted. All right. Is there anything else either of you feel that you need to share? Somebody said, have the three of you found getting a diagnosis to be worth the effort?
Yes, but like a lot of things in life, it depends. Mm-hmm. I don't even, almost 8 years ago was when I got my diagnosis, and really for much of that time I did nothing with it. The first 6 months, and then I I mean, I can now look back and say I was burnt out and overwhelmed and I wasn't getting the support I needed. I was put on medication that didn't really work for me. And I sort of thought that was the end of the road. The medication isn't working. I'm still feeling burnt out. This must not be true. Well, no, what was happening is I didn't really understand, wasn't given the proper support I needed. I'm going to blame it mostly on the insurance. Wasn't given the proper support and education I needed to understand what it was that was really causing the burnout and to address that and find other ways to cope and renew. I don't think that you need to have a diagnosis to work on those things, though. I guess I just want to say really quick, and this is my take on it. So I have no professional credentials. The other two women on this call are far more qualified than I am. But my lived experience is that there's this thing that we call neurodiversity because brains all work a little differently, and some brains work more differently than other brains. And sometimes those differences lead to real challenges, and sometimes those challenges fall into areas of disability where we are unable to properly cope with certain challenges in modern living. And if you are in a place where you are unable to cope with some aspect of modern living, then a diagnosis should definitely help. If you're talking about ADHD, there are medications out there that work for not everyone, but a majority of people. So with the proper medical support, you can probably find something that would help you. There are also wonderful programs, accommodations, behavioral related things that you can change. The nice thing is you don't need a diagnosis to change those kind of behaviors. So if you're talking about ADHD, and that's what I can speak to, if listening to people who have attention deficits or have been diagnosed with ADHD, if that resonates with you, start with those behavioral modifications. Start with these changes in how you work. The information's so freely and available online at this point. Start with that and see if it makes a difference. And in that case, you don't have to wait for a diagnosis. It doesn't really matter as far as your life goes. But if you are really struggling with a disability where I cannot function in this environment doing this, at least in America, you would definitely benefit from getting a diagnosis because then you would have the option. And I don't think it's the only option, but you would have the option for medication, which in the case of ADHD has been shown to make a difference in the majority of people, So I guess the answer is yes and no.
Joel, can you just talk? Because, I can see in Joel's personality complete shifts of when he has exercised or not.
Yes. So what works for me, and I talked to Zariya about this, and again, ADHD, not necessarily autism. What I've discovered is oftentimes the way that I want to operate in the world are not the ways that are best for me to operate in the world. Wisdom that has come from doing things wrong. So my natural inclination is to sort of live life by feel and kind of do what comes in the moment. I am a putzer and a piddler. I will waste an entire day just sort of futzing around the house, bouncing from one thought, oh, I should do this, and I'll get halfway through the project and then I'll jump to something else. Hours. Without realizing, because then timeblindness, I don't realize how long. So a routine works for me. It's taken years. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's taken a lot of self-compassion. But after years of working at it, I now have a morning routine that I get up at about the same time.
Way too early.
Way too early for most people. I do not recommend it, but find what works for you. It works for me. Find out what works for you. I take care of the dog. I exercise very early in the morning. If I don't sweat and take a cold shower, I can't focus. But if I do those things for the next 2 to 3 hours after I do that, I generally, again, I love that analogy. Not every, sometimes I'm dealing with a slotted spoon, but generally for the next 2 to 3 hours, I can get in what I call a solid focus block. So about 90 minutes to 2 hours of good, solid focusing on an activity. Ideally, an activity I find somewhat interesting, right? Because the less interested I am in it, the more I'm going to have to work at it. But anyway, so through a combination of sort of exercise, diet, and kind of behavioral things, at this point, that's how I'm managing my diagnosis. And I don't need to have a diagnosis to do any of those things, but that's what works for me.
Yeah.
I would encourage people to try those behavioral things first, but I'm not going to say that that is what will work for everybody. You know, there's just nothing keeping you from doing those things. So why not start there? You don't have to wait for a doctor. You don't have to, you know, wait for a prescription. You can just try some of these things. And if you know what, if you try it for a little while and you're like, this really doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for you.
Yeah. And one of the things I just want to add, that the reason that Joel and I know each other is because we body double. So I get distracted, he gets distracted. And so we meet and then we say, what are you working on? And then we work on that we'll say, well, we'll check in an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And then we'll ask how it went and what were the struggles. And if either of us are struggling because we've got an email that's difficult, we'll interrupt and say, hey, can you help me with this? So we can get cleared and then be able to focus again. So body doubling is something that it's helped me get more work done in the last year and a half than I've got done in my whole life. And that's thanks to Joel showing up every day and body doubling with me. It's just been so life transforming for me to have that support. It's just incredible. And it makes such a difference because then I'm not lost, like you say. And I think being autistic, the parts of me are contradict. Whereas, you know, you can do that daily routine. The PDA part of me just rebels and doesn't want to do it. And so it's not as easy. And in terms of diagnosis for me has completely changed my life. It has lifted shame off me that I have felt. I was always told that I was lazy, wrong, stupid, bad, annoying, and just having the diagnosis just makes me go, I just needed love. I needed support. I needed skills. I was not a bad person. When other parents are talking about their children being autistic and how annoying they are, I could just go, oh, well, this is why they're struggling. Like when they're brushing their teeth, it feels like their bones are being assaulted. It's really uncomfortable. Oh, I didn't know that. Then they ask the kid says, yes, that's why it's hard. But people haven't actually taken time to check in what is actually going on in a sensory way for you that's making this hard. And yeah, I wish that people had done that for me. And being diagnosed has just changed everything. I have so much more acceptance. And also I have no tolerance now of being around people who are shaming me for not masking and trying to be somebody typical. I'm like, I'm Marmite. Some people love me, some people hate me, and I'm going to be around the people who love me. And I'm grateful for those who do.
Well, we are grateful for you.
Trey, just give me a second, because Joel, I know that you are going to be late for school.
Yeah, I've actually got to jump off the call. I'm sorry to exit.
Yeah.
Especially before Trey. I'm curious to hear what your feelings were, Trey, but I do need to go. So I'll rewatch the end of it later. Thanks you for inviting me.
Appreciate you showing up. Loads of love.
Bye.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think it was answering the question about the diagnosis. I think with most with quite a lot of diagnoses, there is so much stigma around it that, like, especially in our society, you're brought up like internalizing that stigma, and then everyone around you as well. So like with that aspect, it is really hard, like gaining a diagnosis. But for me, it was really worth it, because similar to what my mom said, it was like, it's not that like anything's bad or wrong with me, or that I'm stupid or lazy. It's that my brain just works in a different way, and I need to learn the ways that it works so I can help it so that I'm able to thrive better. And So, of course, I am very ableist towards myself in so many different ways, which is not fair to me at all. And I am working on it, and I hope I've gotten better at it. But you don't need to have an official diagnosis for your self-diagnosis to be any less valid, because it is hard to get a diagnosis, and at the moment there is such a long waiting list, and if you do decide, oh, I do want to get one or I don't want to get one, it doesn't mean you still shouldn't try to access the support that you can get, because a lot of the support you can get without having an official diagnosis. So just if you don't have one, it shouldn't stop you from like learning the different ways in where you thrive and where you need more support to gain that or get that. Yeah.
And I just want to add, if anybody in the UK is wanting to get a diagnosis, just write the word diagnosis in the comments, because I have a video and I can go and get the video on how to get the diagnosis quicker in the UK, because the majority of places are 2 to 4 years. I should have asked Joel about the process in America for people, but you know, I know what the process is, because I've spoken to him, is going to his insurance, finding out from his insurance who are providers that do that, and then contacting each of the providers to check and then making an appointment. So that's how he's done it. But here, I'm happy to share. There were just a couple of things that I can see on my list that I have been a place that I have been ableist towards other people who are neurodivergent. One is object permanence, where like for me, in terms of mess in the house, I will drop something on the floor and then I won't actually see it, and I'll just step over it and I'll carry on work, you know, just live with that. Now a friend on the floor, just looking at me when I walk past, with me ignoring it. But this is the same thing that happens with friends of mine who are neurodivergent, who will say to me, I'll contact you next week, and then they don't. And because I had a lot of trauma, because my dad would do that. Sweetie, can I just ask you to mute, because it's making a background noise? Because my father would do that, I would just get traumatized. And I would feel so desperate that they didn't love me, they didn't care. And as I have begun to unmask and not overfunction, I don't reach out as much anymore. I'm just focusing on the thing that I need to do right now, which is my business, my work. I'm writing an inner child guide, and that's taking a lot of time. And when other people who are unmasked, who just live their lives according to what their interests and passions are, as a friend, I might get dropped off and I feel unloved, unseen, unheard. But the reality is they're not doing it on purpose. They absolutely do love me. It's just that they're hyper-focused in their special interest, and there is nothing else that matters. It's like being plugged into an addiction, and you're just like, that's all you can focus on, and nothing else matters. To everybody else around, you think, I'm invisible, they don't love me, they don't care. It's not the truth. The truth is that their brain is so hardwired and singular focused that they can't think or see anything else. And so when I'm like that, my kids are so great with me. They will come in, they stand by the door, they will look at what my energy is like. And if they see that I'm hyper-focused, they walk out, and they might send me a message and say, oh, when you are ready, can we have a chat? Because I just will get into these really hyper-focused states. If somebody distracts me or tries to communicate, and I try to pretend that I'm listening, but I'm just not. And then I finally have to just say, I'm really sorry, I didn't hear anything that you said. Can I finish this so that I can then come back to you and hear you? Thankfully, my kids are older, and when they were younger and I was doing a master's, I would only work from 7 after they were in bed, and then work through the night until 3, because I knew I couldn't do both. Because once I get hyper-focused, nothing else exists except whatever that special interest is. And I think being in relationship with us can be really, really challenging. You know, I often joke with Joel that I'm never going to be in a relationship with anybody because it must be so hard. It's really easy having a friendship with somebody in New York where we don't actually have to live with each other, but we can be deeply supportive as both of us being single parents and understand each other. It just makes life really easy, where there isn't somebody else that you have to take care of or consider living with you. But I would be so much more successful if I had more accommodations, more support, somebody who actually cooked and cleaned, so that I would just literally hyper-focus through the night if that was happening. And it's frustrating that it can't happen. And I actually have to, because sometimes I might completely forget to eat, but then other times I might binge eat. It's really frustrating. And it isn't something that I choose. So other people might judge me for it, but it's not something that I'm choosing to do. Okay.
Going back with like getting a diagnosis in the UK, like someone commented about the USA, how it's different in every state. In the UK, it's also different in whichever area you are in. So with the place that you got diagnosed with, they don't diagnose all over the country.
Yes, so that's true. They don't. You actually have to contact them and ask where they are speaking about. And I just want to go back to that hyperfocus. I just got a text from somebody listening. That hyperfocus is phenomenal for folk who are creative, genius type folk who are able to just develop things beyond what other people can, where they notice patterns and details and energies and capacities and things that neurotypical people just don't register at all. But when they are engaging with it, whether it be a book or a record or a film or whatever it might be that this neurodivergent person has created, it just fills them up in their senses that ADHD and autistic people just have this, everything that they feel is, you know, when I hear a sound like a tap dripping, it's not a tap dripping over there. It's a hammer hitting my bones. And so my poor kids, you know, they've had to, a lot of times I couldn't function if they were like tapping or anything, because it literally would just feel like a chainsaw inside of me. But that's a beautiful capacity when it comes to a therapist, when I'm working with a client and I can feel things that are happening inside of their body and go, what is this sort of mass over there? Or what is this feeling over here? And they won't even notice it, but I can feel it in my body of what they're going through. So it's a beautiful capacity. And all of these capacities, the hyperfocus, is astonishing in terms of what we can get done and what we can see, but horrendous for folk who are living with us where we can't function in any other way. So when, in terms of accommodation for the hyperfocus, we need support to be able to do that, to create our lives, but then we need accommodations to be able to function in other areas, because we just don't have capacity to do that. And it's really frustrating living it where we don't have capacity. You know, sometimes I remember once I could not function lying on the bed, and one of my best friends said she just had a feeling that I wasn't functioning that day, and came around, and my kids were running around, and she just found me on the bed and on the sofa and said, I just had a feeling today you weren't functioning, so I've come around to cook dinner. I've put it in the oven. I'm setting your phone. You need to go and take it out in 20 minutes. I couldn't function. And that's so hard to be able to do. My kid's dad was phenomenal at his capacity for organization and cooking and laundry and all of that. And when he was gone, none of that happened. My kids just lived in a pigsty for 10 years. And, you know, it's really hard. But knowing that diagnosis, it has meant my kids no longer shame me or make me wrong for it, because I might have stayed awake until 2, 3, 4 in the morning the night before, and I've got something done, or I've created a course for, you know, a client might have So I work with folk who've had trauma, or they are neurodivergent, or they have had neglect, or they've had abuse. And the client might share a story that is touching to them, and then I'll just stay awake and write a course overnight to be able to support them. That capacity is beautiful, but it doesn't help in functioning in the house. That makes it really, really hard. And the final thing that I haven't shared that I wanted to is that part of what neurodivergent folk hate is small talk, because it's repetitive, it's boring, it literally just feels like nails on a blackboard for me. So a friend of mine was saying, you know, she has a lot of people that she smiles and waves at. And I'm just like, yeah, I'd rather sit down and have a deep conversation. You know, I like saying hello to people, but I don't like, hi, how are you? And we often might have a struggle in a large group where people are saying little bits, but there's no depth. So I know for myself, I way prefer one-to-one, where I can speak deeply about what is going on in somebody's lives and really meet them. And so it does become weird, because I'm definitely a lot of a hermit, because I don't enjoy that superficial social reaction. I love being invited to things so that it lets me know that I matter to people. But I have a lot of anxiety about being in a public situation, because I get bored, frustrated. It makes my whole stomach and my legs squirm, and I just want to get out of it, because it's not deep, it's not interesting, it's not unusual, it's not urgent. So none of that is important to me. All right, I think that I
agree with one-to-one and not like in groups, because I know, like, for me it's both a mixture of, like, it takes me a while to process what is going on in a conversation and to sort my thoughts out, and so a lot of the time when I'm talking, I start at, like, I guess the starting point, but that's not actually how I think or how I feel, and then I actually have to vocalize and talk through it until I actually get to the point that I wanted to make. So it's very long-winded, and in groups, because there are more people, I get cut off quite a lot of the time, so I don't actually get to speak. And then a lot of the time, like, either the conversation's moved on to something completely different, and I finally managed to gather my thought for a conversation 5 minutes ago, and it's like, I can't say it anymore, and then I have to catch up with the conversation that's going on now. So having like a one-to-one conversation, it's easier, because also there's less sensory stuff going on, so then I'm able to focus more, and it's a bit less stressful and overwhelming. And like, I know it's not necessarily a competition against like everyone else, but in a sense it can be, because it's like trying to compete to like respond or something, if that makes sense. But then, I don't know.
I know that you have a lot of fear around being in social situations, because it's so hard to follow the conversation, to connect what needs to be said, to be able to respond at the right time, to understand who's speaking, when your turn is. There's so many different dynamics socially, and autism is a social disorder where you don't understand the cues, the timing, because you've got time blindness, and also, especially if you have PDA and ADHD alongside autism, then there's a sense of a lack of interest in what people are saying. And I want to give you this humorous example of us going.
Could I quickly say something?
Yes, sure.
That was relevant to the thing, and it's also, what do you do when you finally had your thought of what you're going to say, but someone else has already said basically the same thing you were going to say? And it's like, what do you do in that situation? Like, because then you don't have any, you don't
have something to contribute, and saying like, oh yes, ditto, or same as them, just doesn't make sense. You know, I know for myself, one friend of mine said, was introducing me to other people and said, this is my weird friend. Because I will just, if the conversation is boring, I will just say, can we talk about something else? And my son is the same. So Treya was talking about bidets. She just thinks the world uses too much toilet paper. And she was going on and on and on and on in the circular dyslexic way that she does about little details. And my son he is autistic and a very, very fast thinker. And so he gets very bored in conversations. I wish he was here, but his computer didn't work, so it's frustrating. But she was talking and he said, I'm a bit bored now. Can we change the subject? And I said, well, what you need to do when somebody's in their hyperfixation on a special interest is you need to ask a question about that interest that also becomes interesting of something you're interested about. So he goes, Treya, do workers make the bidets? And Trey's like, yes, they do, because it's still talking about bidets, so she's interested. And he goes, so do the workers get treated well? She's like, well, capitalism, I doubt they do. And so he says, well, I think the workers should create a union and unite against to get fairer pay, because he's obsessed with righteousness and justice and fairness. So he derailed her whole conversation to make it about his interest. But, that is the challenge of communication, and a fear of, I have been scapegoated and made wrong so often for what I say. And I'm trying so hard now to only be around people who are not ableist or internally ableist, because a lot of my friends do have neurodivergency, but they have a lot of shame around it. So they try to be very neurotypical. And then when I am just being myself, fully living myself, all the shame that they feel towards themselves for being neurodivergent, for being ADHD, for being forgetful, for not having the executive function that they wish, for all their jealousy that I am living the truth of who I am just comes flooding at me. So I'm trying really hard to only be around folk who really see me for the gift that I am, rather than want to make me into somebody else. I think that we have answered everything. If there is any other question, please ask. I'm so happy to answer while we're here. Nathan, you are so right.
Yes, competing needs and competing, because we are a family of 3. We all have different sensory needs and sensory issues, and our sensory needs can sometimes be the other person's sensory overwhelm. So there can be sometimes when we are all I guess activating each other's sensory issues, we can get into big fights, and then we have to separate. We have to go into different rooms, because we are just and it's not easy. But really, then so we also have to accommodate for each other's sensory issues, my mom said earlier about tapping pens and stuff. For me and Lau, that's us stimming to help us self-regulate, but we can't do that when that is sensory overwhelm for her. I guess it's learning each other's sensory issues so that we are able to support them. But then it also does mean that we have to sometimes mask around each other, which unmasking is draining, but it's
Yes, it is so complex, because we have completely different capacities. Treya is brilliant at organization, but I am not great at organization. She struggles more academically, but I can support her academically. So we find ways to be able to meet each other's needs, so that we can all thrive. It does mean that I have less capacity in the world, because I'm trying to accommodate for my kids' needs a lot. So I do very few therapy sessions. and I run a membership called Restore, where I can respond to people when I've got capacity, when I'm not with my kids, because my kids do take a lot more energy than a neurotypical kid because they need more accommodations and support. But thankfully, they're my hyperfocus, so they come first, and I give all the best energy that I have to them. And next come my clients, of that deep support to them. But I know that I can work less than the majority of people because of that burnout and exhaustion. And having ADHD, autism, and PDA, there are competing needs within those parts within me that I have to sit and negotiate between myself, and to see what accommodations that I need to accommodate for the different parts of myself to be able to operate. And when I have those competing needs, I can often get completely paralyzed. Where I remember years ago, when I had complex PTSD, where I just sit staring at the wall because I couldn't function at all. And that level of burnout is utterly exhausting. And the more that I can focus on regulating myself so that I am calmer and clearer, and the regulation tools that I'm going to teach in this regulation skills course, self-regulation training, are designed, some of them are designed by an autistic guy, of what helped him to be able to function, that we learned because of Treya went to a tutor who teaches those skills, and now all my clients use them because they really help. So I'll put the link in the comments for folk who want to sign up to the self-regulation skills training, because once we can regulate ourselves, and you find yourself in paralysis or in meltdown or in burnout, and you're able to do the regulation skills, then you're able to function and get back to the things that you're passionate about, that you love, that really make a difference to you, because you're able to flow more with them. Anything else you want to share before we go, my love?
Not off the top of my brain, head. I just want to say, thank you to everyone who is watching live, and then thanks to also everyone who watches it in the future and not live. Or if you rewatch it, thanks for rewatching it.
And more than anything, what I really wish for each one of you is you have no shame about who you are, and you don't shame those who are neurodivergent. Because it's not that we are wrong or bad. It's literally that our brains are different. Autistic brains tend to be genetic. The majority of us are genetic. And as I've looked at it, I can see, oh, my mum probably was autistic and overfunctioned and masked. And that's why she took pills to fall asleep, because she, there were all these things. And my dad was probably ADHD. That's why I'm gifted with both of them. Aren't I lucky? But it does make sense. And I had severe learning disabilities and special needs as a kid. And so I just, I had to cope. And so I kind of expected Treya to work hard and cope too. So helpful, her getting diagnosed, because then it made me realize, oh, I'm probably dyslexic. That's the one thing I haven't got diagnosed with, but I probably am that too. So, because words fly off the page. Nathan, so much fun having you here. Fellow autistic. Gail said that she's got 2 neurodivergent kids who were adopted soon after birth, and I struggle to understand all you talking about when no one talked about it in a way that was helpful. It so frustrates me that there is not enough information. Like I said, I have a degree in psychology. I have worked as a counselor for literally 30 years this year, off and on through my life. I never knew about what it looked like in people like me. And so all my life, I grew up ashamed of me. Sadly, not only was I ashamed of myself, but I shamed other people who did the things that were neurodivergent. If they didn't call me, if they info dumped at me. So I have a friend who will just send me these long emails, but not ask me about me. And so I would just end up feeling loved. unloved. He was really loving me, of telling me all that was happening in his life. But I was like, where's me in this email? You never notice me. No, he just expected me to speak up and share everything about me. He just expected that is what we have. And, you know, Joel and I speak every day, and he's a storyteller. So he tells the most beautiful stories, and I can listen, and he'll go, I've just spoken for an hour. And I'm like, yeah, I loved you speaking for an hour. I loved listening to it. It was beautiful. And for him to no longer feel any shame that he is talking, because I just love it. And then he knows that if I have something to say, I won't make him wrong and make him feel like he's being self-centered. I'll just say, hey, I have something important to say. Can you listen? And so I have so much regret, and I feel tremendously bad that I have made people who I deeply love wrong about themselves because they have been neurodivergent. And one friend of mine said to me, I'm not going to change. I've been like this for so many decades. Can you just accept that as friends, we have different idiosyncrasies? And that just struck me. And I just felt like I can't even accept my own idiosyncrasies. How can I accept his? So I went to therapy to work through all that shame in myself. And then through the whole process of diagnosis, I was able to accept myself and stop shaming me. And then I could contact him and say, I realize that I've shamed you for who you are, and I'm deeply sorry. And so I really hope for all of you that you investigate, if you feel that you are neurodivergent, that you investigate it. If you are neurodivergent, there are so many tools out there that support you to be able to function well in what matters to you, not what the world wants from you. We live in this crazy capitalist world where you have to work 9 to 5. No, find the way that works for you. That doesn't work for me. I have 50 clients in my Restore membership. If you want the link, I'm happy to share it with you, where they can write to me and in the group, and I can respond at a time that mirrors what is right for me, rather than having to show up working 9 to 5. It might be that it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Like last night, I was about to go to bed, and I kept hearing a voice in my head saying, you can't go to sleep yet. You can't go to sleep yet. And I was like, I wonder what it is that I'm waiting for. Suddenly, somebody in my group responded, something deep, something very personal, something huge for them. And the little voice in my head said, now you know why you couldn't go to sleep. We were waiting for them to post. I could respond, and then I went to sleep. But I can do things in an asynchronous time that works for me. Okay, so Nathan, this is really fascinating. You said that our interior experience gets reduced to a diagnosis criteria and assumptions about our behaviors. Exactly. Even when we're speaking of love languages, and more than anything, I wish that everybody, like I have virtually dropped all the sort of diagnostic stuff of going, these were the different markers. Like I needed to know the markers to get the diagnosis. And so I went through all the different traits and I wrote down how I'm like those traits, and it made sense of my whole life. But now being diagnosed, the diagnosis criteria is, I think, so white, cisgendered, male orientated that it doesn't go into the depth, the capacity, the affirmation of being neurodivergent. And I think we need a whole new way of looking around neurodivergent people that is affirming, loving, proactive, welcoming, where we're seeing what accommodations do you need to be able to thrive in the world, and how can we bring the things that you're interested in to life so that you know that you matter. I always just felt like a second-class citizen, and I felt so shamed by so many coaches that I worked with who just made me wrong, going, just hustle. I'm a single mom too, just get it done. And having this diagnosis just makes me know how they do things doesn't work for me. And I have to find my own way and have to find the way that matters to me. And so I love working with neurodivergent people because I love honoring them and finding them, supporting them to work in a way that works for them. All right, Pops, is there anything else you want to share?
With because how long ago did you do your psychology degree?
Well, it was 33 years ago.
Right, and I am just finishing mine. Yes, hustle culture is so toxic, and humans are not designed to function in that way. But in my psychology degree, it is like we do have a few lectures on it, but we don't have very many. And with me and my other neurodivergent friends on like the course, one of our main complaints was when they speak about they don't even speak about like all of them, but if they speak about a neurodivergency or they speak about like a mental illness or a disability or something, they speak like no one in the lecture could have it. And it just feels very like shit, and it's like like, and in a sense it feels like very like it feels like they can speak in a very superiority way of just being like, we're above this in a sense. And it doesn't feel comfortable being in those lectures. And then if one of us shares like, oh, I have this, the lecturer's shocked.
Yes.
Of like, yes. But how can you be at uni if you have this? You shouldn't be able. So I guess like that goes back to the stigma of like it. Yeah.
It's huge. And so I think what you're saying is
it's improved.
Yeah.
The bit that they're actually talking about it and how in depth they talk about it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it's so frustrating that you've been treated like that. And I think the thing that I'm hearing is they speaking from a top-down approach of this is what it's like for them, rather than, hey, does anybody have this? And I have, as a, sharing on social media, I try so hard to share, this is my lived experience, and speak from my heart to other people. It does mean that people think that I'm just messed up because I'm speaking so personally about my reality, but I want to be speaking as an equal so that I'm not speaking down to people like I'm on authority because I have a psychology degree. No, it's just, a few books you read and vomited up on a page. It's nothing special.
And it's just a piece of paper. The degree is just a piece of paper.
What matters to me so much more is the processing and the work that somebody's done to be able to relate authentically. And so I have a huge thing of anybody advising, talking down to me, because it would just make me feel like they don't get my gifts or my talents or who I am. But on the other side, because I'm so against that, I often will play down who I am and talk about my vulnerabilities so that other people feel safer and less ashamed of their vulnerabilities. But then it makes people think, I don't know if she could hold me as a therapist because there's so many things that are going on that are challenging. No, I want to be real with the challenges so that people feel less alone in their lives. And when we're around folk who are autistic, ADHD, PDA, who really get that capacity, and because I didn't understand, because I have got so obsessed with trauma and focusing on empathy and how empathy repairs, when somebody is autistic and they have done parallel play where they are like sharing their whole life and then not then not giving me any empathy, then I feel like that they haven't loved me. But in fact, them sharing all their interests with me is them loving me, and I didn't know that. And I feel deeply sad because it's made me feel like I missed who they were. And we are doing this in the hope that you see these beloved people who are autistic, ADHD, PDA, and you receive them and get to understand what they're doing rather than make assumptions or judgments or shame them for who they are, who we are, because we are beautiful and all deserve to be loved, respected, honored, and cherished for the differences and the weirdness. All right, everybody. I've just heard my thing going, and it's a message from Treya, and she's telling me we need to end.
It's also because I also have chronic pain as well, so it's hard for me to sit in the same position for a while. But thank you for coming to our over an hour video that was supposed to be an hour. And if you've stayed from the start, thank you. Yeah.
So lovely to connect with all of you. And sending each and every one of you so much love and goodness on your journey. Thanks for coming here. We love you. Go well.